Okay, so happy Friday, everyone. Today is Friday, June 21st, and this is Beginner Beekeeping, Frequently Asked Questions, episode number 22. So thank you for those of you who posted questions last week. And if you're brand new, then welcome, and I hope you get something out of it. If you want to know what we're going to talk about today, please look down in the video description, and you'll see line item by line item the topics that we're going to discuss so that you won't waste your time. And if you have questions yourself, of course, as always, please write them down in the comments section and feel free to answer questions that other people post if you happen to have experience in a specific area. No one is smarter than everyone. So I welcome you to discuss amongst yourselves, and questions that look like they'll be of broad interest will be added to next week's Frequently Asked Question number 23. So let's get right into it. Today it is 57 degrees, although it's warming up right now and the sun is shining, so that's a good thing. Some of the video sequences that you'll see up to the sides here during my discussion are from the observation hive. People have been asking for updates about that, and those were filmed this morning. So things are hopping everywhere. Bee yard's going great. We've had heavy rains, and the bees just haven't had a break. And my grass is growing. You can't even cut it. Really sad that I can't mow my yard. It's my favorite thing. Not. All right, let's get right into it. First is from Aaron. And this is based on a video that he watched. I did a flow hive video. Big surprise there. And he noticed that the honey was different in different frames of the flow hive, and I was drawing them all separately. And Aaron writes, if honey on different frames has different nectar sources and they get multi-source nutrition, should you not leave some of everything, each variety, for the bees themselves? Now that's an interesting question, but we have to go back to the purpose of honey to begin with. And the purpose of honey is a carbohydrate, and it's an energy source. And for us, we like the different flavors. When you're drawing honey off of a flow hive, you can do it frame by frame directly into jars. Therefore, you get clover honey in one, maybe you get aster in another, and goldenrod in another. So that separation of honey resources is something you don't generally get when you're doing traditional uncapping, spinning out, draining, straining, and bottling later, because you're blending everything from the honey super together. With the flow hive, we have it all broken up separately. I don't think individual honey sources will change nutritionally what the bees will benefit from. When do honeybees benefit the most from the nutrition of what they're eating? That's right, during their development. So the protein source for the bees and the quality of the food that they get is during development. That's when you're going to really decide and have an impact on the overall health and well-being of the adult bee. Often people will shoot me a picture and say, look, a baby bee, and it'll be some tiny bee on a flower. That's not a baby bee, because bees, when they hatch out of the brood frames, they're fully formed, full size. They don't get bigger, they get fatter, but physically the structure does not change, and it does not become a bigger bee like, we have a baby person and then later you're growing and walking and you're taller. Bees are adult size when they hatch. So the thing is, nutritionally, honey is an energy source. Honey is an energy source that does not spoil. That's what's fantastic when it comes to the hive and their ability to store honey for long periods of time, months, years, tens of years, hundreds of years, and thousands of years. Raw honey has been discovered to be still viable. So as a carbohydrate source, the proteins, the pollen sources, those are critical. When the bees bring those in and the nurse bees mix that up with their enzymes and they create bee bread, pollen comes in and it's fermented. So it goes through a lot of different changes, but the quality of that protein is much more critical for bee development and overall health and well-being of the colony than is later the honey that they get, which is primarily an energy resource. So no, I don't believe that I should save some of every type of nectar source and subsequent honey. I don't believe I should save a broad spectrum of that just so the bees can benefit from each type, because it really is not a strong nutrition source for the bees. It is primarily an energy source. So I hope we answered that, but when it comes to quality and the time to put that in, it's with the proteins. So the pollen resources around are going to be critical for the development of healthy bees. Number 2, what's the best camera to watch my apiary with, and what are you using? I do often mention that my apiary is under surveillance, and I like to see what goes on in the bee yard. Conspicuously placed here, I do a lot of reviews on game cameras, trail cameras, motion activated cameras. Someone recently asked me if there was a camera system that you could put out there and get a live feed from your phone and so on. You can. That's a home security system. And you have cameras that are outside that you can zoom, that can tilt, that you can pan the area, and you can get live feedback through your phone. That's not what we're talking about today. I put out, and I'm just going to mention a few trail cameras because these things are cheap. You can put them anywhere, but each has its own strengths and weaknesses. You can also set them to go off only at nighttime, which is what I prefer to do because during the day my chickens and everything else roam through the bee yard, and I'm just going to get a bunch of video and stills, and all of these cameras will capture still photos and video photos, one right after the other. So you can even set the delay. So I'm showing 3 different cameras here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. All the trail cameras come with a 1/4-20 receiver. Sometimes it's almost always on the bottom. Sometimes there's one on the back. This one doesn't have that. And this allows you to mount it and support it with an articulated game camera holder like this. You can put into a fence post, into a tree or something like that, and then you screw that on there, and then you can tilt and angle it. This is a Bushnell Nature View camera. This is probably one of the more expensive ones. It comes with different lenses, and this focuses really close. One of the things I don't like about game cameras and trail cameras in general is they're designed to shoot and capture something that's 20 yards out because they're looking for deer and game that people would hunt for. I like to see things up close. So the Nature View camera, which I've done a review on already, and I'll put a link down in the video description if you want to see the details, but it also comes with its own little screen, so that helps me position it, and I can control it a little bit and make sure to see what the field of view is and how in focus everything is going to be. So I could set this camera here and video something this close. So if you've got some activity, if there's a mouse going in and out of your beehive and you want to see it, you want to see how many there are, you set up a Nature Cam, Nature View. Interchangeable lenses, get super close, and it holds a pile of batteries. One of the cheaper things that works really well too is this Browning camera. These are pretty good. They're small. Again, it's got the 1/4-20 on the bottom. The battery pack slides in and out. These all use rechargeable AA batteries if you want. And it has little teeth on the back, and you can open this up and there's a little screen, and they're all very easy to program. I did a review on this also. So the choices, what I'm saying is, trail cameras are fantastic. The one I'm testing right now and just used on a recent skunk, if you see my skunk video, I just put that up last night. I like the idea of this one. This is the Solar Dark Spy Point camera, and up here it has a solar panel and it comes with built-in batteries, because one of the things I hate is setting up a trail camera in an inaccessible or hard to reach location, and the batteries don't last but a couple of months. So I want to be able to put a big card in it, and I want to save a lot of videos and pictures, and I don't want to have to disturb the camera. So the solar powered thing is supposed to be fantastic. Plus you can supplement that with your AA batteries. What kind of AA batteries do I use? I use the Anyloop AA's that are professional grade. The lithium batteries also last well in really cold weather, but with a solar thing, I'm hoping it works. But let me tell you what happened. When the skunk went into my cage yesterday, actually it would be night before last, camera didn't trigger. Skunk was already in the cage, so I didn't get to see the trigger mechanism go off, but I had redundant coverage. I had 2 of these out there, and I had a regular Bushnell trail camera out there too. It did catch it. So the solar powered one, it had decent quality video, but it triggered late, so it wasn't sensitive enough for something like a skunk. But bigger animals, whose dog is in your yard leaving those calling cards every Sunday morning when you come out to get your paper and you step in it? You want to know whose dog that was? Put your trail cameras out, and then you can show your neighbor, here's Charlie right here, so don't deny it anymore. Anyway, trail cameras are what I use. Another thing is, word to the wise, when I set out cameras, cameras are easy to steal. somebody can just cut the strap. They can just screw it off with a holder once they discover it. So guess what I do? I have cameras on my cameras. So if somebody took one, I'm going to get a sweet video of the culprit. If I find out it's a good friend or somebody, they're going to be in for it. I'm going to put that on social media. Kidding aside, trail cameras are cheap, easy to use. They go right onto your computer. That's the other thing. What kind of files do they collect? You want one that will record MPEG-4s or AVIs so that you can put that right onto your computer and it will play through media player and things like that. Some of these cameras produce videos that are not compatible with the Adobe Premiere Pro CC, so I can't add them to my final production. I have to use an intermediate software, then I have to change it to an MP4, then I have to integrate it to my Premiere Pro composition. That's why I did not add my game camera footage to my skunk sequence from last night. That's a funny video, by the way. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. So those are what I use. I do not go all in on a live feed camera that I can check on my cell phone. How come? Because I don't own a cell phone. That's right. I'm off the grid. And my house is 100% solar powered too. Therefore, everything I hook into my house is also solar powered. All right. So the other thing is about drones. Somebody asked, let me see if I wrote the name down. I did not write the name down of this viewer. Do I use drone frames and what's the purpose of them? This is a drone frame. This is made by Acorn, big surprise. Although all the companies that seem to make these drone frames are, they're all green and the cells are bigger because drone cells are bigger. So what's different about them? That's it. The cells that are already embossed on this foundation and heavily waxed are larger than worker cells, and that's to encourage your bees to draw out drone cells, and then they are used to reduce the number of Varroa destructor in your colony. And if you're like me, maybe you pull a few out to see if you can catch Varroa on them. But I'd like to talk a little bit more. What are drones anyway? Drones are the male bees. Why do Varroa go after male bees? The male bees are bigger, they take longer in their cells, so it's a longer opportunity for Varroa destructor to reproduce in those cells, lay their eggs, hatch out, and then attach themselves to bees. So by using drone frames, you allow a bunch of drone to be developed, you get them capped over. Once they're capped, you can pull it out. So you would naturally cascade these. In other words, you would put one in here and 7 days from now, you would put another one next to it. And then you would put another one next to it after that, so that there's always developing drone, and then you can pull them out. But I do want to talk about drones a little bit. Some people get rid of drone frames right and left. Oh, that's drone, that's bad, let's get that out of here. That's the opposite of what I do. Usually when you look at a frame of brood, you can really tell the drone cells because they're convex. They pop right out on the face of the brood frame. Usually they're around the edges, on the fringes, sometimes they're in the outermost frames. And I like to have them. I like to see a lot of drones. Why? My drones don't mate with my own queens. Like if they have a supersedure or if they have a swarm and they go out and I have a virgin queen, she's not going to mate with the drones from her own colony. But guess what I want to do? Because I found out recently that there are actually a lot of apiaries around me. There are people that are kind of secret about it, but I had a friend come up, a neighbor, who lives not even a mile from me. And he showed me a chart of my whole area, and of course there was one right in the middle and it said Fred's house, and he shows all the apiaries around the area. So that means I run the risk of other people's genetic stock getting into my genetics when I allow a colony to swarm, and then they get a new queen, and then that queen's going to breed with drones. So what do I want to do? I want to send out the strongest, fastest, high-flying, queen-hunting drones that I can get. So I want them to be super healthy. I want a lot of them to go out there, because if I have apiaries in my area, and the one guy that showed me everything, you know, he's never bought a bee. His entire apiary is composed of bees that he's captured, swarms that he's captured. And then, of course, he reproduces within his own apiary, so he doesn't buy them in. So if I'm sending out colonies and I'm sending out prime drones that are going to outcompete some of these other drones, I'm spreading the favorable genetics because I already know that the bees that I keep in my apiary, they're the best. Nobody even comes close. They're just the best. So I want everybody else to have my bees. So I'm kind of like the Monsanto of beekeeping, because my crops will pollinate your crops, and then your crops become my crops, and then your crops are like my crops, and I own your crops. See what happens? I just won't own your bees, but I'm going to affect your genetics, and then your bees are going to be like my bees, and then your bees are going to be Varroa resistant hygienic bees, and they're going to be good stock, and they're going to be able to winter over well. And then if your bees send out drones and I get virgin queens, then see what we're going to do? We're going to start increasing the diversity, but they will have adapted well to the cold weather climate, so we'll have our own line of bees through the area unless somebody else's drones are better than mine, and we know that can happen. So I like drones. I want to keep drones. I want to see lots of drones around. And when your queens, if you're in my area, when your queens fly out to that drone congregation area and they need to be mated, and they meet with 12 to 15 drones. Tom Seeley recently said that they're mating with up to 20 drones. So that's a lot of activity, and that's a lot of genetics. So my goal with my drones is to spread my genetics in my area and send good genetics out, hopefully to displace anything that I might find undesirable. So don't get rid of all your drones. Don't kill them all off. That's not what it's about. Have good healthy drones and good healthy colonies. And then also, when you use those drone boards and stuff, if you've got chickens like I do, you can just set those out and the chickens will eat them. So if you're using that to reduce the number of Varroa, although it was a big ripoff, I don't use those anymore. So I just have the drone frames so I can teach about them. But when I used them in my colony, I got all excited because I'd be able to pull out, final phase pupa, and I'd be able to find Varroa on them, and instead I cut open whole boards and I had tweezers and I'm pulling them out, and I got 0 Varroa on my drones. So it was a big letdown, so I just stopped doing it. I just let my drones hatch naturally. All right, the next question is from Nancy Weasel. There isn't a lot of pollen in my area of town. How can I support a modest hive without sufficient pollen? That's an interesting question. And I believe, although I didn't write it here, I think Nancy lives in Arizona somewhere, some arid region. So here's the thing. You know what I noticed that the Weatherman does? The Weatherman puts out pollen counts for people that have allergies. And you know what I've noticed in my area? When the pollen count from the Weatherman is high, then I go look and my bees are bringing in more pollen on those days than other days. And when the pollen count is low, usually after or during a lot of heavy rain, then my bees aren't bringing in much pollen. So I would suggest, and I already answered her, I would suggest that you check in with your meteorologists, see what the pollen counts are, see what the pollen sources are. They're actually a fantastic source of information. So you may actually have more pollen available than you're aware of. Now, if it's just a period of dearth, where it's a time of year where you're not getting a lot of pollen, then you can put out Ultra Bee. Ultra Bee is a pollen substitute, and it is highly recommended by a lot of professional commercial beekeepers. But it says right on the bag, don't use this when you're going to draw off honey from your honey super. Now, we know that some pollen particulates will get into your honey. That's why raw honey is fantastic for people that have allergies. So apparently they're covering their bases by saying, don't use dry pollen Ultra Bee substitute from Man Lake while your honey supers are on. So I don't know what the detriments are, but if your bees are risking not making it, then if you want to provide a pollen substitute, Ultra Bee is the best thing I can think of. But it has that little warning on there that you shouldn't be using that. But if you're in a dearth, you're probably not drawing off your honey anyway. So, but check your pollen counts. You may have more than you know already. So that was a very interesting question. And I'm going to post a link in the video description that will link you where all you do is type in your zip code and you'll see what the pollen counts are day by day. So you can check it just like the regular weather. So that's an interesting question. But I think there may be more than you're aware of. The next question is from Larry Collar. Do field bees search out and bring back what the hive needs, or do they just get what they find? Well, that's an interesting question because bees definitely have preferences. When they're going out for nectar and pollen, there are storekeeper bees inside the hive. And when those foraging bees land and they've got pollen on, now the bees with pollen on their legs, the pollen goes directly to the cells, so they don't really get judged about that. There's no storekeeper bee meeting them and taste testing and then deciding whether they need what they're bringing in or not. So when it comes to pollen, the foragers are on their own to decide whether that's desirable pollen or not. In some areas where the pollen isn't great, some bees have been nutty enough to collect even sawdust and things like that. So often those foraging bees aren't the best judge of the quality of what they're bringing in. So that, if it's sawdust, it's definitely not going to be used by the colony. Chances are it's just going to sit in a cell and be sealed up, or hopefully one day a housekeeping bee will clean out that cell and just get rid of that pollen. Although I don't know, have any of you ever seen bees cleaning out pollen cells and discarding the contents? I mean, what if they don't eat the pollen? So it's good, you know, after a couple of years to be rotating your frames out with fresh frames. So that would also rotate any old pollen, because sometimes you get frames solid with pollen, but if you notice, it's a bunch of different colors. So that's an interesting question. When it comes to nectar, the bees that are coming back to the colony with nectar, and of course they often have nectar and pollen, but they'll be met by a hive worker bee that I call storekeeper bees, and they'll stick their tongues out and they do a quick taste test. Sometimes if that bee that's bringing in that nectar, if whatever the taste tester tastes, if they don't want it, then you'll see them retract their proboscis and they won't exchange the nectar. So then that bee goes off into a hover. So is it a proboscis or is it their tongue, or is it both? So anyway, they stick their tongues out, and if they have in the honey crop what the hive needs and what the hive wants, what that storekeeper decides, then they exchange. The contents are transferred from one bee to another. So with all of this transfer from bee to bee, that's why we have enzymes added to the nectar, that's why we have antibacterial properties added, and ultimately it goes into the cells for storage and it gets dehydrated down and becomes honey. So they have a lot of opinions about that. Some bees do get rejected, and if they're full, if it's almost honey-bound, or if whatever they're bringing in they don't want, we've done some recent stuff about the audible communications of bees, the beeping and piping of queens and things like that. And storekeeper bees will actually interrupt a dancing bee. So once they come in and they're doing the waggle dance, and if what they're bringing in they don't want, that storekeeper bee, and you can see this in an observation hive, they hit them on the side, and sometimes they grab them and give them a shake, and they also make a little beep sound. And when they do that, that tells that forager that what you're bringing in we no longer need or we don't want, and you just go in a hover, and then you'll see a whole bunch of them clustered off in a corner or up in an upper frame area doing absolutely nothing and keeping the resources that they brought in with them. So if there's abundant nectar resources out in the environment, the bees become very choosy about what they're going to keep and what they're going to use, and they do reject a lot of stuff. On the flip side, if resources become scarce, then they're going to take whatever they can get wherever they can get it. That's when you start seeing your bees on the hummingbird feeders, and they're just going after all the secondary stuff. So if nature is not providing what they need and what they want, then they will take whatever happens to be available. That's why a child spills the soda on a table. You're going to see honeybees lapping that up because there's a huge amount of sugar in that. Never give soda to your kids. And 7 teaspoons of sugar in one, I'm not going to name the drink, but one soda? That's incredible. I don't drink soda. But anyway, bees will when they get desperate because of the sugar content. So synthetic nectar is appealing to bees when natural nectar does not measure up to what they need. So yeah, they will use just whatever is available in the absence of premium quality resources in the environment. So that's an interesting question. Next one, and I hope I say this right. Elvira Mora has questions about oxalic acid vaporizers. The 120 volt or the 12 volt DC, which is best and what time of day, and how do you get your bees out of your honey super when you're treating with oxalic acid vaporization, and blah, blah, blah. It goes on like that. So what I did today is I brought out 2 different oxalic acid vaporization sublimation systems, let's say. So vaporization is just turning a solid into a gas, right? So sublimation is the same thing. And this is when I talked about this earlier on in the year, I believe. This is a very small one. It hooks up to your 12-volt battery, and I showed the battery system when I did a review of this. So if you want to see that, just look at my oxalic acid vaporization video. And hooking up to a battery allows you to go anywhere you want to be. So if you've got an apiary far afield somewhere and you just take your battery with you, you take this with you, and this takes 2 minutes and 15 seconds to run a half a teaspoon. Yep, because you do a quarter teaspoon for every brood box. So half a teaspoon of oxalic acid crystals. So, and then you're done, and it takes 6 minutes. You leave everything sealed up and you're good to go. But you have remote access, and this thing was thin enough, and so I guess I could put another link in this video description as well. This goes into even the thin openings of the flow hives. So the other oxalic acid vaporization irons that I had did not fit. So that's a simple one, and I'm going to talk about, they do the same thing. They both are going to put oxalic acid vapor into the colony, and that is going to kill you. It's going to kill your varroa destructor mites. But here's another one that a lot of people don't have and won't get. Why? Because this thing's expensive. So this is the OxaVap, and this thing has to be plugged into a 110 volt power cord. So if you're like me and you have odd configurations that a regular iron won't fit into, then this OxaVap system, which is a sublimation cup, again, just like the other one, all it does is heat up the crystal. But this one is different in that it delivers it through this tube that's going to fit through a 1/4 inch hole. So that means, what if you have an observation hive? I can't take a regular oxalic acid vaporization iron and stick it in there because there's no openings like that. But what I can do is I can drill a 1/4 inch hole through the wood in the side of my observation hive, and I can drill a 1/4 inch hole through the back panel of my slatted racks, or I can drill a 1/4 inch hole in the bottom board of all of my hives, and then be able to stick this right in the back and vaporize in 20 seconds. So this thing, I know these are expensive. So this is not going to be for everybody, and unless you really need something like this that has that access, or you're doing, 1,000 hives or something. I'm not doing that many hives, but I have configurations that negate my using that regular iron for stuff. So this, with a 1/4 inch hole, all you do is, and these things, people think these are like ceramic and stuff. This is made out of Teflon. So what happens is, with these, you're going to take your 1/4 teaspoon per brood box. So if you've got 2 deep brood boxes and you've got just a bunch of honey supers, the honey supers don't count in your calculations, because first of all, you should not be doing an oxalic acid vaporization with honey supers on. But I'm going to talk about that in a second too, because that was another part of her question. But you're going to take your Teflon cup here, which has a little O-ring on it, and you're going to put, so if you had 2 deeps, we're going to put half a teaspoon of oxalic acid powder. And then you're going to take this, which is already on, and you're going to, you're going to push this on nice and strong. Now here's the thing, you're going to burn yourself. So I put these here to remind myself, get yourself some good work gloves, because this thing is going to get up to 230 degrees Celsius. So then now it's ready to go. Your vapor's in there, and you got to make sure the cup is seated right on the top there. Then when you're ready to go, you flip it over and you stick it right through the hole, right into the hive, and this is nice and stout, so it will be supported by this tube. So that's the delivery method, and you're going to watch this little digital readout. This is coming up. I'm going to do actual demonstrations. I keep saying I'm going to do demonstrations and the weather doesn't cooperate, but I will show you how this works. And because we're going to have to do it on the observation hive, of course we'll have the glass, we'll be able to see how all this moves through. But anyway, once you flip it over, it goes, it starts to sublimate right away. And then you're going to see the temperature on the top. The temperature on the bottom will read 230 because that's what you started with. That's how you knew it was up to temperature to operate, 230 Celsius. And then the top number will drop. And when that gets up to about 220, 225 as the powder sublimates, then that means when it returns to the normal temperature, that means that all that powder is gone. And then you're going to pull this off and you know what? When it's hotter, these come off easy. When this thing is cold, they do not. So anyway, you're gonna, when it's hot, you're gonna take that off, and then you're going to have your next one ready. You're gonna flip it over, you're gonna push that on. Now these are designed to fit snug, but when it's cold and you put that in there, forget about it. So anyway, and it's gonna sit like that, but also never set it on anything that will melt. Never set it on anything that will burn. It's going to get really hot. And then I just wanted to give a quick demo here. Because you're drilling a hole, you're going to drill a 1/4 inch hole into your, whether it's your bottom board, slatted rack. You want to make sure that when this thing goes through the hole into the hive, that this doesn't butt flush against something like the frame of a brood frame, for example. So you want to make sure that that goes all the way through. And then, of course, you've got this hole in the side of your hive. So then I take this 1/4 threaded thumb screw and I put that through there and I make sure it sticks through. So this is inside your hive and this is outside. And that way, if the bees decide to do their magic and put propolis on it, then you can just pull this straight out and you've got a clear hole. So you want to make sure that that stays clear, plus that lets you know exactly where your oxalic acid vaporization access is at a glance. So then you just pull that out from your beehive and then you come over and you start treating them. At the end of this video, I'm going to turn that on and show you that that lid comes off. Okay, so if you've got an extension cord and you are going to run power out, or if you've got a portable generator or something, that's by far the most effective. That's by far the fastest. You're going to deliver everything in about 20 seconds. And then you can go on hive to hive to hive and you just keep it all closed up. Plus you have that access hole, so you're doing it from behind the hive. And of course at the bottom, and it sublimates and passes through the entire hive. Now, if you've got honey supers up above, the second part of the question here was, how do we get the bees out of those honey supers, and what time of day should I be doing this? Well, you want to be doing this either early in the morning before the bees have begun to forage, but usually they're cold early in the morning, so they're kind of clustered up. So if we're talking late summer, for example, then in the evening, right after sunset, when the bees are all in there, that's generally when also the wind has died down and everything. That's a very good time to treat because all the foragers are in there and they're up above, and you're going to get those brood frames and everything else. But you want to keep it out of the honey super. So first, how do we get the bees out of the honey super? We use a fume board. Excuse the condition of this one. I tried to polish it up this morning just for this. But fume boards are, this is a 10 frame fume board, 10 frame fume board. And this goes right on top of your honey super. And you're going to take some, oh look, magically, I have this honeybee gone the natural way. And you take this stuff and you're going to spray it all over your fume board. And then you're going to put this on top of your honey super. And then the bees are going to evacuate down into the brood boxes. And then what you're going to do is you're going to want to prevent them from getting back up into that honey super because you want all those bees to be exposed to your oxalic acid vaporization treatment. So then you can just put a cookie sheet between them. If you carry one of those big aluminum cookie sheets, slide it right between, you just created a perfect vapor barrier. Or you can put a plastic trash bag, anything that's gas impermeable, you can put between your honey supers and the brood boxes that you're going to be treating. And it takes a few minutes for them to migrate down, but they will do it. And then you do that, and that way you can still, and then as soon as the treatment's over with, after it's cooled back down, you can go ahead and, I prefer the cookie sheet because all you have to do is tip it up and slide it back out. Trash bag may tear, it's a lot more effort, but you can do that. All you have to do is create a vapor barrier between your brood boxes, which is the treatment area, and you're going to do 3 cycles 7 days apart. Okay, so that should answer that. Bees and honey supers, how to get them, separating honey, flow super started, fume board, and that's it. And I showed you the iron here with my Teflon lid stuck in it. Of course, when it heats up, the cup expands. It'll come off, you'll see. All right, and then, wow, that's the last thing. That's it. That's all I have for today. So I did want to share a story with you. I got some swarm calls this week, and I've been saying no to everything as they've come in because I just want to let other people get them. But there is a neighbor whose father has a very old home, and he's got his own honeybees inside the attic area of his house, and he's perfectly fine with that, and he's glad that they're there. But this year, they swarmed a lot. So, and when he called and asked if I wanted to come and get it, he said that a lot of neighbors had gathered and there would be people there that wanted to see how a swarm gets caught and things like that. So I said, you know what? I had to be somewhere in an hour. So I have to go get the swarm and bag them, box them, put them in the apiary, and they'd be ready to go in less than an hour. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you is when a swarm is clustered on a tree branch, and this one was just above eye level, this is perfect for catching a swarm. So what I did is I come in and I set my box up. Now, normally you would set up your box right underneath the swarm, shake the tree branch. I spritz them with sugar water and stuff, but it was already raining, the bees were already wet. And you shake them into the box, they fly all over the place, and then you pack them down in there, and then you close it up and you take it home. And because it was wet and because it was raining, we did not have a lot of bees flying around, so it was very easy. So one of the things I like to do, look how torn up this is. This is kind of a commercial grade, you know, like what you might find in college if you were studying entomology. This already has holes chewed in it and everything because I've had European hornets in here. But this is great for a medium-sized swarm. I put the whole thing around the tree branches. I had snips and I snipped off the branches and let the whole thing just fall in here. And then you got some choices. I took it and I just twisted around like this. And then I have the whole bag of, and look, they can breathe through that. They're not jammed up. And then I put this in the box. Then I disconnected this part. And I closed the box right up in it. So I had the frames out to make space for it. And then we put the screen on the entrance and loaded it in the back of the truck, and off we went. Kind of disappointing for the people that were there to see this big elaborate procedure of how to catch a swarm, because we collected them, we were done in less than 10 minutes and out of there. And we didn't have to wait for foragers to return because they were all clustered because of the rain. And now that colony is doing fantastic. So that's just a tip I wanted to pass on. If you're catching swarms, look at this thing. This is kind of like a pillowcase material, so this is even better, but it's the same procedure. This is a strong aluminum piece, lightweight, so it's really better than a bucket. You can reach everywhere with this thing. So you can climb up on your ladder, get over there, give them a quick shake with it, get them to drop into it, flip it over, and now you've got a whole bag of bees here. And then you can twist this, and you can zip tie that, and you can lay this whole thing right in your car and not even bring your box with you. So if you know you're going to get the swarm and leave, and you're not going to leave the box and wait for foragers to return and, you know, rejoin the group and everything, these butterfly nets are fantastic. This is a grab and go system. Like I said, look at how big a swarm that would collect. And how light this is. You can get right up on a ladder. Always have pruning snips with you. But that's just a tip I wanted to pass on. I want to thank you for watching me today, and I hope that you're going to have a really good weekend, and I hope that your bees are doing great. And again, maybe our weather's going to be better. So that's about it. If you have questions, please post your questions down below. If you like what you saw, please click a like. If you want to subscribe and follow me, subscribe and then click the little bell so you get notifications when we post another video. So thanks again. Now let's see if we can get that Oxalic Acid Vaporizer Teflon cover off, because that's bugging me right now. It made it look like I don't know what I'm doing. I hate that story.